I don't need to know where it came from. I don't need to know where the plague came from. I just know that it came. And so how do we accept that and, try to find the best way to deal with it?
Welcome to Cancer Talks, a podcast sharing personal stories of transformation from people whose lives have been touched by cancer. My name is Claire DeLaslo, and I'll be guiding today's conversation. Our guest, Christine Chen, teaches humanities at St. John's College in Santa Fe, New Mexico. She's a professional violinist and a less professional wrangler of 2 kids. Hi, Christine.
Hi, Claire.
Welcome to Cancer Talks. Could you start by introducing yourself in whatever words?
I am a 43-year-old, college professor, a violinist. I have a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old, so I'm also tired, and I live in Santa Fe, New Mexico.
And what do you teach?
I teach at a great books college called St. John's, so we have a sort of unusual all-required curriculum for the most part in the classics. So I teach anything from philosophy to math to ancient Greek and music. So it's varied and the students are great.
Wow. What's the title or the subject of a recent class you taught?
So right now I'm just doing a senior language class and we are reading Camus' La Peste, which is the plague in French. And as you can imagine from the title, it's completely timely and appropriate. So we're reading about this plague that unfolds in Algiers in the 1940s and just the kind of mental and physical devastation that it wreaks on this town. So
wow.
Pretty great to be talking through it with the students. Obviously for them, it feels very real.
Yeah. Can you share a little bit about how, those parallels appear to you? What was going on in that plague and what's similar or different?
Right. Like I said, takes place in a town in Algiers. I believe where Camus was born in the 1940s. And it's sort of in the backdrop, there's fascism, but he doesn't specifically allude to it. So people have read it variously as a kind of political allegory about, just what it's like to live under the shadow of fascism and totalitarianism. But I think for us, clearly, we're reading it very much with our own pandemic in the forefront. So it begins with a rat here and there just being found in the street dead. And at first the citizens are like, whatever. And then the numbers start mounting up. And suddenly there's hundreds of dead rats. And this doctor, who's the narrator and the man who, sort of, you don't know this until much later, but he's the one that's telling the story. It's told from his perspective, has this growing realization that this is what's going on. And at first the authorities don't want to acknowledge it because once you issue the order for plague, a whole slew of things take place, shutting the town. Nobody can go in or out. Everything, life as you know it, has just been inexorably altered. And I think now we can all so unfortunately identify with that. And Camus spends a lot of time thinking about what it means to be in exile, both from your loved ones, but also this idea of self-exile. What does it mean when you can no longer say things to the people that you love? What kind of meaning is there? And I think that's one of the deepest ideas to talk through in the book. I think for us, we tend to kind of group sadness under this rubric of depression, right? I'm so depressed that, the kids are depressed because X, but I think to really think through what it means to be separated and to face death. Of course, for me, having gone through the last few years, but for all of us now, I think it's just a really valuable exercise in thinking about love and connection and meaning.
Yeah. Can you say a little more about whether they're, in reading it, things showing up for you that reflect your experience of the cancer journey?
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I mean, I take from it different things I imagine than my 20-something-year-olds are. But so for me specifically, I mean, I think the isolation of being hospitalized for many weeks, not being able to see anybody, for me specifically, I think having had this stem cell transplant for leukemia during COVID, it was like 5 weeks in the hospital and you couldn't see anybody in person besides your nurses and the doctor. Yeah, I mean, just this idea of how do you fill your days when the things that you thought comprised your life aren't really there anymore, right? The activities, the work, the kids for me, all of those questions that I think we grapple with at a kind of background level of who am I and what am I here to do? I think that's the question too for Camus in The Plague, is the absurdity of what is the meaning of life, right? If you don't have these, I think, connections to both, again, your friends and your family, but also the things that you thought sustained you, what's there at the core.
Right.
Yeah, and just also, of course, what is suffering? That's the big question throughout all of these books that we read. Yeah, is there something good that comes out of the suffering? I don't think any of us would want to say that these terrible things happen so that something good comes out of them. But I think Camus was pointing out that, particularly in modern life, I mean, that's one of the big things too. I should have said this at the outset, that when the plague hits, it takes so long for the citizens of this town to come to terms with it, because it is so far outside the scope of what modern life is supposed to give us, right? We don't think that plagues come out of nowhere. We don't think that rats are going to start dying and then pass on this terrible affliction to us. We think modern life, modern medicine, we can control these factors.
We don't think that people can get cancer from living normal, healthy lives.
Exactly. You're supposed, you do the right things, you exercise, you eat well. This doesn't happen to people who do the right thing, right? And so I mean, I think the randomness of it is really kind of the most powerful message. We don't have control over most of these things, right?
So I want to slow down a few paces and take a few steps back to hear more about you and where you came from, and what happened in your life before cancer showed up.
Yeah. So as I said before, I'm a college professor and a violinist. So before the big C entered my life, I was teaching full load. I had my first child, a boy, in 2015, and I was already at that age considered advanced maternal age. They really have to come up with a better name. I don't know.
Really mature. Good at being a mom.
There you go. Or like mature, maternal, MMA, right. So I had, I was 37, almost 38. And I've always been really active. I've played soccer most of my life. So I was playing soccer throughout my pregnancy with Kai, doing yoga. Yeah, I mean, generally feeling pretty good and strong. And we had bought a house that we were redoing, an old adobe on the historic east side, and just doing a lot of violin, just hanging out with my dogs, hiking. So life was pretty good. We were dealing with some other background stuff, including some issues with neighbors, but like a lawsuit. And so that was already pretty stressful. Yeah. But aside from that, it just felt like the normal stuff, normal human stuff. And then in 2018, I got pregnant again. And that was our second child, Mika. Got pregnant in 2017. She was born January of 2018. Mm-hmm. And that was the day that everything changed, because I'd had a completely normal pregnancy and vaginal birth for both. My kids, they blew out in a couple hours. I was very lucky. But after I gave birth to Mika, I remember the midwife came in a few hours later just to make sure, things were looking right. And she looked puzzled and said, there's something hard in your abdomen. So next thing you know, sort of whisked down to get an ultrasound, which showed a humongous mass, then a CT scan. And so the next morning, so I think about 12 hours after I'd given birth, my husband and I and Mika, the newborn, were at the University of New Mexico Cancer Center and talking to a great doctor who at first thought it might be something called a gastrointestinal stromal tumor. Obviously, I'd never heard of this before. And immediately, my husband goes to like statistics and survival rates. And I remember having this niggling feeling like this just doesn't seem right. It doesn't sound right. I don't have these symptoms. So I did research on my own, being a college professor, and I found literature about a very, very unusual tumor called a desmoid tumor. Obviously, I'd never heard of this before. It was so rare. It's like 2.1 people out of a million. But I said, I think I have this. And so I suggested it to this oncologist who was wonderful. And she said, okay, well, let's see what the biopsy says. And so, yeah, we waited about 5 days, a week, and came back as a desmoid tumor. So, yeah, in a way it was good news because a desmoid tumor was considered intermediate malignancy, so they don't tend to metastasize. And so I thought, okay, well, we can just get this enormous tumor surgically removed, and then I can move on with my life.
Are you the kind of person, like, there's a pretty high level of intuition, or maybe you would just call it like deductive reasoning or something, but it made me wonder whether there are other experiences that predate this cancer moment of intuition with your body, or is there anything that set you up to really know that you should that awareness you had that what they were saying didn't feel right?
That is an interesting question. I would say that I wasn't particularly intuitive about my body just because I really hadn't had any issues before then. I'd always felt, I think I felt for sure aware of my body just from being an athlete to some extent, but I don't know. I think it just felt like one of those moments where your body is telling you to listen to it, right? And it wasn't, it wasn't like a history of having known these things or felt these things. It just felt like in that moment there was some clarity, and I knew that she was wrong. And she knew. It wasn't a diagnosis at that point. It was just a hunch. Yeah.
Got it.
But I do think that it actually, through these years of the journey, I have definitely started to listen a lot more to my body, and been much more aware of that.
And what had your experience of cancer been like in people friends or family, before you got diagnosed?
Very little. It was just, this is really interesting. I don't think I knew anybody directly. I didn't have any close friends or family who'd had experience with cancer, but it was as soon as I was diagnosed that a couple close friends, colleagues, close friends were also diagnosed at the same time. And so it felt like all of a sudden it was all around me. And I don't know if it's just that I just wasn't paying attention. You know what I mean? It's like, if you don't have kids, you don't really pay a lot of attention to what other little kids are doing around you, or, how old they are. I would have had no idea. But once I had kids, I'd say, oh, that's an 18-month-old. Oh, I totally know what phase, So I don't know if I just became more aware of it, or if it really just did seem to all happen at the same time.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. But when it did happen, it seemed like the world was just sort of falling apart for a lot of people at the same time.
Right, because you got your official diagnosis when?
I guess it would have been late January of 2018. And then we decided at that point to be treated at MD Anderson in Houston, just because it was such a rare tumor. And I think they had the largest they saw the most patients of this particular kind of, it was a sarcoma. So the rarest of the rare. So went to Houston in February and had a nice doctor there, young doctor. And she said, well, there's no standard care or treatment for these kinds of tumors. And because of where it's located, we can't surgically remove it. And that was devastating. Yeah. So that's,
oh my God.
because I was so banking on having it removed and then I could continue to breastfeed my daughter. But I was told that because it was so large and aggressive that I would have to do chemo. And so, I'd breastfed my first child through until he was about 14 months. And it was a really easy, good relationship. And I had looked forward to doing that with Mika. So, yeah, I think that was the most devastating in some strange way to know that that was going to not happen, because it was all about having a trajectory and a plan. And suddenly that was just yanked out. Right. And yeah, I mean, you obviously never put together having a newborn with like suddenly having to do chemo and mortality. So I had a really hard time with that, to say the least. I think all the pregnancy hormones were still flooding through my body. So yeah, to suddenly have to stop breastfeeding, that was a rough time for sure.
Yeah.
So we went home. They actually put me on tamoxifen, which is, often used to treat breast cancer, under the assumption that the tumor was estrogen driven, because it had obviously grown from nothing to enormous proportions during pregnancy. And,
Right.
And it was totally hidden by the pregnancy. So none of the ultrasounds that I did during the pregnancy ever picked it up. So we tried tamoxifen for a couple months and it didn't do anything. If anything, the tumor kept growing. So in May of 2018, I started a very high dose of adriamycin, which some listeners might know as the Red Devil, and something else, dacarbazine, and did 6 rounds of that. So it was pretty brutal, but I think I was just so intent on getting through it that I don't know. I didn't. I mean, to me, it was like being in a soccer game in a way. It was like,
wow, endurance.
Game on, just go for it.
Were you in the hospital most of the time?
No, for this, I was able to go home to Santa Fe and be treated, at the local cancer hospital here. And so at least I could be home with the kids and comfortable. And my parents came out from California and helped out a bunch. And my husband's mother lives here in Santa Fe, and she was also a huge help. So, we had a lot of good things going for us. But after 6 rounds, it didn't really do much. And that's just the nature of these tumors. I think if they respond to the chemo, it often is delayed. So I think psychologically, that was a huge blow, just thinking that this was going to do it. And then after all that suffering, and it didn't. So then a clinical trial specifically targeting these tumors, which was incredible, just happened to arise during this time, which meant going to Houston, back to MD Anderson about once a week. So for my daughter's, second year, I spent most of her second year flying back and forth to Houston once a week.
Without her?
Without her, definitely without her,
oh my God.
Yeah, so I would spend a night there and then come back, do class. That was hard. That was tiring. But again, just felt like, okay, well, maybe this will work, because this is actually targeting the specific tumor and not just blowing up everything in my body.
I found myself wondering just now, did you feel ill at any point before the symptoms of the chemo? Like, what was your experience of that cancer? No.
Nothing.
Wow.
Just felt like a lot of heartburn, but that is just what happens with pregnancy a lot. So, I don't think there was any, no sense. So I definitely didn't have any intuition on that level. So it was just totally a lightning bolt from the sky to know. And I think to carry it around, though, for about 2 years was psychologically probably the worst thing, because it was such a large tumor. And I've always, like I said, been athletic and dropped pregnancy weight immediately after I had Kai, my first child. So I just felt like there was this thing that, while my body was making this beautiful baby with this mass of cells, it was also betraying me by building this other massive malignant cells. And I felt, I think betrayal is probably something that a lot of people can identify with cancer. Just like, what you were supposed to, you weren't supposed to do this, is what I felt.
That brings up two questions for me. One is, do you relate to the tumor as part of you? And the other is, have you forgiven your body?
Yeah, those are interesting questions, particularly the first one, I think. I did not for a long time. We jokingly referred to him as Jorge. I apologize to all the Jorges in the world who are probably wonderful. This one was definitely not. I didn't. I felt, again, I think through most of this cancer, so that's the spoiler, there's another one. This cancer felt very much like this horrible alien thing that didn't have anything to do with my life and my body and had no right to be there, if that makes any sense. And again, I think I just felt so not myself, after chemo. So I lost all my hair. Yep.
Did you have long hair before?
I did. I had long straight hair. And now after 2 different kinds of chemo and losing it twice, I now have short curly hair.
It looks great.
Thanks. I'm getting used to it. It reminds me of my mom with the perm in the 80s.
Oh my God, totally.
It's not necessarily who you want to be like your mom in the 80s, but I didn't feel at all that it was part of my body. But I think that's the thing about cancer, right? Is it's you, and yet it's just your cells that have gone rogue.
Yeah.
So, I was very angry with my body for a long time. That makes sense.
And did Jorge receive forgiveness?
Jorge, yes. So to fast forward, after the clinical trial and the chemo, Jorge did finally get the picture and shrink down quite a bit. So cool. I would say Jorge is he's in there. He's probably like the size of an orange or something, somewhere lost in the vast cavity of my
They have an agreement.
Abdomen. We have an agreement, that he's just gonna lay low, and we're not gonna remove him. He just has to just lay low. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But, so after doing the clinical trial for almost a year, in December of 2020, we were getting ready to finally, the surgeon at MD Anderson said, I think we can take it out and get it all. So I was really excited about that. But I was also starting to feel really tired. And, we figured it was just from travel. Going to Houston was not fun. Having young kids, it just seemed like it's probably just from being really fatigued. But since I was getting blood work almost every week, they said, they flagged it, the pathologists. And I got a phone call from my oncologist in December, early January, and she said, it might be nothing, but looks like you have hemolytic anemia, which is when your body is destroying its own red blood cells. And
this is in 2020?
January of 2020. Yeah. So sorry. This was all happening December 2019, early January 2020. Right. But again, the intuition thing that you mentioned, I remember texting my husband. I was really mad at him for various reasons. And I said, I don't know. I mean, I probably have leukemia.
Whoa.
Yeah. And about a week later, she called and said, yes, looks like early stages of leukemia.
Was leukemia like something you just pulled out of your ass as a cancer word? Or why'd you say that?
I don't know. Moment? I don't even know why I said that. Yes, I totally pulled it out of my ass. But I think it was because it was just, the connection with blood. That something was wrong with my blood. Yeah. And I thought, okay, what goes wrong with your blood? You get leukemia. Mm-hmm. Went down and got a biopsy for that. And it turns out I was in the, 3-4% of people who get leukemia from chemotherapy.
From chemo.
Yeah. So I got the leukemia from the chemo that I did for the desmoid tumor. Yeah.
And then the doctor said you should move your family to Houston.
That's exactly what they said. They said, tell your husband to come down here with the kids. I don't think you should go back to Santa Fe. And at that point, I was obviously just totally stunned. We'd had plans to go to France that summer so I could teach there. I was ready to, again, get the tumor out and move forward.
Yeah. And you had been teaching through the clinical trials?
I did. I was just teaching part-time,
Wow.
but yeah.
Yeah.
But
That's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people feel this too. It's just for your mental health. You have to keep doing what you do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I refused to do that. So I luckily, after the initial freak out, I calmed down pretty fast, and I remembered this friend that I have who I'd met over a decade earlier through my work at St. John's. And he happens to be just one of the world's foremost experts on leukemia and bone marrow transplant. Yeah, Dr. Steven Foreman at City of Hope, who is just more beloved than I can even describe. And I called, left him this frantic message and email, and I remember he wrote back. He was, sort of dashing from one thing to the other, but his words were, "Yes, you can come here and I will take care of you."
And
I
got chills.
Yeah, I every time I think about it, I start crying. Yeah, so my parents I grew up about 15 minutes from City of Hope, so it was perfect. We were able to move in with my parents, 2 dogs, 2 kids.
Oh my God.
Yeah, bless my parents. Yeah, so I started treatment there in February of 2020. This was, of course, I think just about the shadowy fingers of COVID were lurking. I got pneumonia for 2 weeks in the hospital after I started treatment. So that was obviously when my immune system was totally wiped out. But yeah, after that, I was lucky enough that the FDA had just approved a combination treatment for AML, for acute myeloid leukemia, of a combination of 2 drugs, venetoclax and decitabine, which they usually use on older people who are immunocompromised or who can't handle the regular chemo.
Great.
But since I'd already done a bunch of chemo, they decided to try this on me, and fortunately it worked incredibly. So,
and not only had you done a bunch of chemo, right? The chemo had
given me leukemia. Right. Yeah. So they were like, let's not do that again. So so we tried this, and I felt pretty good throughout the whole thing. It was really gentle compared to other kinds of chemo. And I mean, my leukemia responded great. That's not really what I want.
Bye.
It went into total remission, which is what they want for in order to do a bone marrow transplant, because I had a specific mutation that is notorious for relapse. So Dr. Foreman said, we'd better just get rid of your immune system and give you somebody else's.
Whoa. Which happens through bone marrow transplant?
Yeah. So a donor immune system that is matched with yours through something called human leukocyte antigen typing. Yeah. So my sister and my brother were not good matches. So some anonymous guy in Portland during COVID donated billions of stem cells to me. And so in May of 2020, they did some chemo, wiped out my bone marrow, the stuff that makes all your blood cells, and infused a guy's immune system into me. And so I have male DNA now.
Cool.
I know. I just like to lie on the couch now. And
Did you build a man cave?
I totally have a man cave now, yes. And sit on the couch watching sports. So there were some very, very awful days in the hospital after that happened, but I made myself walk several miles in the hospital every day, and I think that really helped with recovering pretty quickly.
That reminds me of my grandmother, who passed in 2015. Had respiratory issues and back issues, had some back surgery. Not super mobile, but she would do laps in the apartment for the last 20 years of her life.
Gosh.
She walked a mile a day doing laps in her
tiny apartment.
It's probably 800 square feet.
Oh my gosh. Wow. So props to your grandmother, because
you had a little more.
I had a little more room than that. Yeah. I listened to a lot of podcasts. I don't know what your
Yeah.
grandmother was doing, but oh my goodness. Yeah. So I think that physical movement was really important to recovery.
Cancer Talks is an interdependent community project with a production team of 3, and we count on your contributions. We'd like to thank Christina Whitehawk from Arizona, who is our very first Patreon supporter. If you've learned from or been inspired by these conversations, please consider joining Christina and becoming a monthly donor. To support us starting at $5 a month, or to make a larger tax-deductible contribution, visit patreon.com/cancertalks.
So now it's been a year and a half since that, and all things being equal, it's I feel good.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so a lot of that. How old is your youngest now? 3.
She's now 3. Yeah, 3 and a little over 3.5. So her lifespan is exactly, how long the journey has been, and now she's sassy and rude. So seems like payback or something.
And do you talk about cancer with your kids?
Yeah. We obviously it's hard to know what to say to really young kids, and I think we were fortunate that they were really young because in a way they don't actually remember much of anything, which I don't know, I think is a good thing. I mean, we bring up leukemia once in a while. Kai, the 5, almost 6-year-old, he's a pretty bright kid, I would say, but whenever we bring up leukemia, he's like, "What's leukemia?" So it feels like Groundhog Day with him all the time. And I'm like, okay, well, I guess maybe we did a good job since he really doesn't remember any of that.
Yeah. But does he remember, like, you being away? Or I'm thinking about, his body remembers some things, right?
I think so. I like that. I think his body remembers, but I don't know, cognitively, I'm not sure that there's any retention. I mean, once in a while he'll say, "Oh, remember when you had no hair?" And I'm like, "Oh, which time was that?"
Yeah.
The first time or the second time? I remember when you didn't feel so good. But for the most part, he's just like, "Oh, there was that summer at, my mom and dad's place in California."
Right.
So I think.
Yeah, that time in California. Did the kids like California?
Yeah. Yeah, what's not to like about a pool and Knott's Berry Farm? Yeah,
great. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think someday, obviously, when they're older, I'd like to talk about it more with them. Hopefully, I'll have that chance. But for now, they're living their best 3.5, 5-year-old life.
Awesome.
Right,
Totally.
back in school. So that's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I have to say, I think that was also one of the funny silver linings. About funny, haha, but the irony of COVID was that it did make things a lot easier for our family because since I had no immune system for so long, or at least a very baby one, we didn't have to worry about getting germs from elsewhere.
Yeah.
Everybody, was just being incredibly careful for themselves and staying away. So that worked out really well for us.
Yeah. You said something in our first call about, especially since you had young kids, before the diagnosis, your life was all about the beginnings of life.
Yeah.
Can you say something about that?
I think before something like this happens to you, I think most of us feel like life is full of potential, right? I mean, when you're young, so especially it's like life is limitless, or there's just so many possibilities. You never think of something, just a huge truck pulling in front of you and stopping you from doing these things. And again, I think I'd been really fortunate not to have had, or I don't know, maybe fortunate is not the right word. Maybe I wish that I had a lot more experience with severe illness and death, because maybe I would have been a little less, I don't want to say I had hubris, or like arrogance, but I just didn't think a lot about it. And now I think about it obviously all the time. I think everybody should think about it all the time, not in a morbid, macabre way, but just like to go back to Camus, the plague, that we should all be prepared for this thing that happens to all of us. And
Yeah.
that if we think about it in a deliberate way, I think it should help us understand that life is not about getting things and achieving things and moving through things and overcoming them necessarily, but it's about just enduring in some ways, right? That I think I said to you in that first phone call that in a way I was, in a very twisted way, grateful for the leukemia, because I felt that with the first cancer, I just kept refusing to acknowledge it. Like, this is not my life, right? Just like Jorge is not part of me. This is not my life. I'm just gonna denial. Yeah, definitely denial. Like my husband, we would definitely both do this. Like, okay, when this is all over, we're gonna go and go to Disneyland, whatever.
Still like gripping on to the life is just full of potential.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, like this bad stuff, this is not part of it, right?
Totally.
We are gonna keep using the term move past, but I think that's what a lot of us tend to think of it in that way. It's just something to move past. But with the leukemia, it suddenly became very real that, okay, this is your life and this is life. That, why shouldn't you be one of the 2.1 out of a million to get something, right? People do.
Yeah. And that's what I was thinking something similar when you said, maybe I wish I got it sooner or learned these lessons sooner. My response to that was, well, this is your life. You got it. You got it when you did. Yeah. Everyone learns when they do, which might be at the moment of leaving this planet. Some people, like, that's their moment to learn about death, is like the end. But yours was this moment.
Yeah. I see what you're saying, and I think you're exactly right in one sense. But I also think, I mean, you're in an unusual position because you think about this, obviously, a lot. You talk to a lot of people about it. It's very real for you, I think, in a way that it isn't for most people your age, if I could put it that way.
Yeah.
Being a college professor, I talk to a lot of young people in their 20s, and I mean, I think, not to say that you can't be thoughtful about it when you're young, but I really think it is like experience. Just I mean, there's no substitution for it, right? And I mean, I think it just fighting against it. We use the language of fighting all the time with cancer, right? It's a battle. You're fighting against it, and which is I find a little bit. I'm not sure how I feel about it. I mean, having lost now a couple of friends to cancer in the last couple of years. Some of whom did, quote, fight very hard, probably harder than I did in some ways, I don't know that I want to use that terminology, but for myself, I know that I fought against it only in the sense of, just not acknowledging that this is human life. I mean, human life does encompass a lot of suffering, right? So I think I may have had an easier time of it, at least for the first year or two, had I been able to sort of mold myself or accommodate myself to that reality a little bit better.
Acceptance.
Yeah, I know. Radical acceptance. And that doesn't mean, not staying strong, and it doesn't mean that you can't be angry, or feel like it's unfair. But I think also just I can't say it any more clearly than just acknowledging that this too is life.
Cheryl, who began Cancer Talks, when I spoke to her at a family friend's pool party years before I thought I would ever be part of Cancer Talks. I thought I was just talking to like a family friend one time at a pool. I don't know.
Right.
But she had this seedling of Cancer Talks, and it was about the war mentality, the language of war. It was about, that was her first kernel, was why is everyone waging war? And what could we do? What are other ways we could orient to cancer that aren't that?
I am totally on board with her. Right. Why do we talk about it in terms of waging war? I mean, because again, that also makes it seem as if it's something external to ourselves, right? Something that isn't part of humanity, and it has been for thousands of years, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's also so I have a former student who reached out to me some time ago because he's a practitioner of Oriental medicine now, and he
Mm-hmm.
has this podcast thinking about the ways in which Western medicine treat illnesses like cancer. And he says a lot of his patients, this former student of mine, want to know where the thing comes from, right? I mean, my mom, so I'm Taiwanese American, and my mom's explanation for all this was that I ate too much bread. I'm not kidding. She's like, too
Wow.
many carbs. I still eat a lot of bread. And yeah, I mean, at the time, I was like, God, Mom, like, this is just so not helpful.
Blaming.
Blaming, yeah.
Yeah.
But I understand the impulse. And in my way, I too was like, what did I do wrong? Where did I go wrong? But so this student who's now a practitioner of Oriental medicine, I mean, I think there's a way in which when we ask ourselves, where did this thing come from, right? And we want to find the reasons for it. And there's so many well-meaning people, I'm sure lots of people going through cancer have experienced this, the friends, the well-wishers who are like, try this alternative therapy, right? Or maybe if you cut out sugar from your diet. Got a lot of that. Yeah. And again, it's like, Camus, the plague, everybody's like, was this within us all along? We never knew. And it might be, right? I mean, genetically, I might have been predisposed to it and I just never knew. But I think, so blaming oneself is not helpful. Thinking of it as being something totally external to oneself is not helpful. Right. So there's just some kind of middle ground, and I don't have any.
Well, I'm hearing this wisdom in you. Actually, I think you know what the middle ground is. I'm hearing this wisdom that's like, maybe we don't, especially when you're like the tumor's that big, and then you did the chemo, and then it's leukemia, and you're on your second version of cancer. This wisdom that maybe we don't need to know where it came from.
Exactly. Right.
In your own journey, at least.
I think that's where I've finally, come to peace with it is, I don't need to know where it came from. I don't need to know where the plague came from. I just know that it came. And so how do we accept that and, try to find the best way to deal with it in all aspects of whatever that dealing looks like.
It reminds me of some things we were saying about resilience in our first phone call. Maybe I'll pose the question again. What do you think resilience is?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a better answer than I think what I said to you then. I mean, and I remember when I texted with you a little bit after that conversation, and I said, I don't know. I just don't feel like I have any good sound bites, right? I don't have any bumper stickers to put on our car because like cancer was just such a mess. Both cancers were a total mess. Although, we had great health insurance. And so that was huge. That made a huge difference. Yeah. I mean, I think what would have wiped out a lot of people, for us, it was very manageable. Great support from friends and family. It really was. I think resilience it's not I think we tend to think of resilience as being a sort of one way, uphill trajectory, and you get there and you're at the top of the mountain and you're like, I did it.
I'm so resilient.
Yes, I powered through this. I totally kicked butt on the soccer team and my soccer game and in cancer, and I'm a survivor. I even find the language of survivors. I don't know. I don't use it for myself.
We use thriver, which is a little corny, but it's not survivor.
No, I think that's right. I mean, that's actually how I also described myself recently at this City of Hope bone marrow transplant thing. I said, I'm an 18-month thriver, bone marrow transplant thriver.
Yes.
Yeah, because I mean, I don't know. Again, it's like, this is probably from reading a lot of existentialism lately, but yeah, we are all every day, right? Whether you're aware of it or not, dealing with something, right? Something big,
Yeah.
something huge.
Yes.
For some of us, yeah, the door opens to that suffering maybe a little bit earlier, but I think it's there for all of us. So it is just I don't know, one step at a time, one day at a time. It's sometimes some days you have good days, some days you have bad days. I think just to be, I don't know, to be thoughtful about it though. Maybe that's resilience, however that looks, right? To reflect on it. And again, sometimes the reflection is you feel pretty zen about it and you're like, okay, I am on this journey and I've come to terms with it. And some days some days it's like, Jesus, I'm really effing pissed off about this and this sucks. And I just think taking stock of all of that's resilience.
Is there anything else you want to share? Anything else that would be cathartic to talk about?
I think I think this sort of goes along with that resilience idea that I was just talking about, but just doing the daily check-in, right, with yourself, with your loved ones, I think is really important. It's a kind of like, daily hygiene thing. Just like, we brush our teeth and shower most of the time. I think when one is going through something like this, just the little check-ins about how is it going today? How do I feel today? For both yourself and for your caregivers is really important.
Yeah. How do you do you write? Do you sit somewhere in particular?
No, I am not a journaler. I wish I were. I've always thought about it. But for me, because I'm a reader, so I think I do it. I process it through reading. Right now I'm reading Tolstoy, The Death of Ivan Ilyich, which is very much about, this question of how do you live in the face of imminent death? We all die. What do we do with that fact? So that's how I've been processing and thinking about things. And books, are incredibly helpful, I think, can be throughout when you're going through something like this. I mean, I definitely read a lot of cancer lit. And they were helpful, but I also, I think, found a lot of joy in reading fiction.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, we're going to get a reading list from you.
Oh, good.
I love sharing people's different cancer reading.
That would be really interesting. Yeah, I'd like to hear that. And I don't know if this is too much of a downer to end on, but again, I think with this language of war too, waging battle, and it's so American, but I think that's so much around us, from the slogans, the advertising, the people. You're supposed to be relentlessly cheerful all the time, right?
Yeah.
And to be positive, because if you're positive, and again, I got this from my mom, if you're positive, your cells change and you can, and it kills cancer, et cetera, et cetera.
Oh,
right?
Totally.
Yeah. We are just relentlessly optimistic people. And I think that's a huge burden. I mean, it's just not possible. I think to be positive is good for oneself, most of the time, for your own, how you can get through the day and for your loved ones. But I think that to pressure yourself to feel like that and to put on a happy face for everybody, like not to look sick, is also just totally unreasonable.
Well, the difference between having deep self-compassion or remembering like love or acceptance, that's not the same as putting on a happy face.
Exactly.
Or even staying positive, I think, is often code for there's positive energy, which might be like acceptance, might be a positive emotion that would contribute toward healing.
Yeah.
But it's different than like projecting positivity.
Exactly.
Making a stranger smile, like cracking a joke at the checkout when you're actually like so pissed at your
feeling
chemo.
terrible.
I mean, it's different. Yeah.
That's exactly right. You just nailed that. Yeah. Right. I don't think one needs to feel the need to perform for other people to make them feel less uncomfortable or something with it. I mean, I think I've heard that from a lot of people, that they didn't want to look sick because they didn't want to make other people feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And
did you practice that, or were you like, what did you do?
I totally did not practice that. I did not wear any wigs. I just, I
just sick.
just went out there and I looked sick. And I remember students being like, "Oh,
you're sick.
You're sick." Yeah.
How do I relate to you?
Yeah. But they did, because I don't know. I thought, in the moment where you're teaching and talking or whatever it is that one does, with one's life, that's when you're out of your cancer self and you're in a different self. I mean, the self that you know and feel most passionate about, right? I mean, I didn't feel that when people looked at me, they felt sorry for me. I mean, maybe they did. I didn't care. I just was like, I'm just not going to try to look better because I'm not better.
Yeah.
But hopefully, when you hear me talking or playing violin or whatever, you see that I'm still me.
Christine.
Yeah. Not to say that, I mean, I know lots of women do like to put on the makeup and feel good about themselves, and that's great too.
I wanted to just drop in what you said about resilience on our other call, because I wrote it down. Yeah. It's beautiful. You said resilience is often about powering through, but I didn't have much power, so I had to surrender and give over control.
Thank you for reminding me of the thing that I said before that I can't remember now.
It's beautiful. It's perfect.
Thanks. I like that. I said that. Yeah, I didn't have much power. Right. That I think feels right to everything. There is a season, and that just was not the season. It was the fallow season. So
yeah. Christine's long winter.
My long winter. Yes. Yeah, I was thinking, I mean, in the last conversation we had, I felt like it sort of ended on this grim, or whatever, I mean, not very uplifting note. Cancer is a mess. And I still think it is, right? I mean, there's no way that something comes through your life like this and doesn't, leave a little bit of a train wreck behind. But just talking to you about your own work, about mending, which is so interesting and inspiring to me, it helped me find a kind of metaphor for what I think, happens to life during cancer, but especially after cancer. I mean, particularly the thing that you said when I was mentioning to you, when I mend a sweater, right? It just never looks right. I mean, I can always see the stitches that I made. And it bothers me. And you said, well, when you mend something, or when you help somebody mend something of theirs, the patch, I mean, the point is to not make it look like it was before, right? It's not supposed to look seamless. That patch, that stitched up hole, in a way, is something itself.
It's not going to go back to exactly what it was before.
Yes. It's still, yeah. And you can still use it, and you can love it, and hopefully find some kind of beauty in the fault lines, right? I mean, I mentioned that also, reminded me, the mending conversation reminded me of that, the Japanese art of broken pottery, kintsugi. And right, that too, I think the intention is to not hide the fact that the vase broke, right? But to show that it broke, and to show that it was put back together, but in a way that shows those broken pieces.
It's such a beautiful physical representation of healing.
Right.
As a possibility.
Exactly.
And like a reminder, rather than, the original object might project some sense of perfection or wholeness, or being like one unfractured thing.
Right.
Which, of course, it never was. Like, everything is.
Exactly. Yeah. It never was. And I guess, though, that's the lie that we all sort of live to some extent. I think that... Right, that there aren't these little fractures maybe that are already just sort of forming, and that they're not, again, I mean, it's not like the shattering is the end, it's just like we talked, you asked me about possibilities and beginnings. And I said, yeah, it felt like this is it. There's no more beginnings, but I think this is, right. And just to acknowledge that resilience again maybe isn't getting to the top of the mountain and reclaiming your perfect life, but just
Right.
knowing that this happened, you are different forever because of it, but let that be kind of a thing of beauty, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Since we've talked, I've been thinking about how often I return to a moment in the past that I loved, assuming that it was perfect. But then thinking about this metaphor, if I really think about that moment, there are plenty of things that I was unhappy with at the time too.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, something to go back to in the Camus, something that he points out is that memory is so much more demanding than the present, right?
Whoa.
Yeah. I
Right.
mean, it's a wonderful thing to think about that. Of course, the past is always going to be so much better than it ever was when you were living it, because
Yep.
it's got to be held up to be some sort of image, but life isn't like that, right?
Yeah. I love memory is more demanding than the present. I mean, because it makes me think, what if the present isn't demanding anything?
And
Like,
that's a
can
problem
we-
too.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah.
So let's ask more from the present, maybe, and less from memory.
Oh, yeah. But I guess I was actually maybe saying the opposite. Like, the present is a moment where there's always an opportunity to not demand anything of yourself.
I see. Yes.
Like perfection. Or
Yes.
whatever,
Yes, I can see that too. Yeah. And
Yeah.
I think that's very, very important as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Pay attention more, notice more what's in the present,
Right.
but maybe not demand.
Some artificial perfection, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I that's that self-compassion that you were talking about earlier. Yeah. Yeah. So that I just thought that was really something I want to keep thinking more about is that mending metaphor. And then the second thing that I found incredibly helpful when I was going through it all, I actually got in touch with this guy, wonderful guy named Ben Doherty, who I found through the magic of the internet. He's like the only other person I know of who had a sarcoma and then got AML, acute myeloid leukemia, from chemo,
Yeah.
from the sarcoma. And this wonderful guy responded to this crazy woman who reached out to him on the internet, and just sort of kept in touch as a confidant throughout the process of treatment and the bone marrow transplant. And the thing that he said that stuck with me most was, about statistics. So I think everybody does their research, right? They Google it and they're like, oh, I have this kind of cancer, these kinds of circumstances, and I have this chance of survival, right? I mean, that's like the paramount thing that I think most people who are diagnosed with cancer immediately go to is, what are my chances of surviving this? And yeah, I mean, the statistics are grim for AML, especially, chemotherapy caused AML. But he said, you're one of one. Ignore all those other numbers. They're kind of irrelevant to you. So I think thinking about it in that way, you are one of one, is really something to hold on to throughout. Everybody's, you may have the same kind of cancer as somebody else, but your body, there's no telling how it's going to respond, right? It just won't be like everybody else.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please leave a review in your podcast app. Cancer Talks is a platform for anyone who has been touched by cancer. Go to cancertalks.com/mystory to join the conversation. If you're moved to donate, please visit patreon.com/cancertalks. This podcast was produced by me, Annie Murnigan, and Cheryl Buck, with editing and original music by Annie Murnigan. As always, a special thanks to our donors, friends, and volunteers. We couldn't do this without you.